Looking closer at our core business, we've recently seen a big growth in our range of cooled cameras, but we've also recently launched our advanced uncooled technology, our LWIR cameras. What consideration should people look when choosing between a cooled and uncooled camera?
I mean, simplistically speaking, the primary difference between cooled and uncooled is a question of sensitivity. The quality of the image that the user ultimately sees is a combination of the sensitivity of the sensor and the amount of IR, infrared radiation, that passes through the lens. Simply put, the bigger the lens, the less IR, and therefore the less IR is passed to the sensor. For longer range surveillance purposes, such as coastal surveillance and border security, you need long focal length lenses. Therefore, to compensate for the reduction in IR that passes through these lenses, you need an increased sensitivity sensor. So when you put these two things side by side, where uncooled thermal is concerned, there's a logical limit as to the length of lens and therefore the range that you can see, because uncooled is typically about 50 millikelvin. So you get to a point, anything generally above 300 mil focal length lens, there's just not enough IR getting through the lens to provide a useful image. But this is where cooled thermal comes in. So cooled thermal is typically between 10 and 25 millikelvin. So that increase in sensitivity allows you to compensate for a greater reduction in IR, which means you can then put the longer focal length lenses on. From a performance perspective, cooled thermal will always win out on uncooled. It's a much more sensitive sensor. You get a much crisper and a better quality image, and especially when you're looking at your sort of 15, 20, 25 kilometer range space, you kind of need that cooled thermal. With that increase in performance, there is a cost to pay. So cooled thermal they achieve that level of sensitivity by physically cooling the sensor down, typically to around 77 Kelvin. These coolers are active devices. They're gassed, and they move things around and they reduce the temperature of the sensor to that point. The typical lifespan is between 10,000 and 20,000 hours, and after that point you'll start to see a degradation in quality, and the cooler will ultimately need servicing. And this servicing is generally quite costly. It can't be done in the field. It has to go back to the manufacturer, which will often lead to down periods in capability. So if you were to look at, say a 5-year in-service lifetime, a typical cooled thermal might have to go back to base, say 2 to 3 times, at a fairly large cost each time, and you're looking at a 30-day, maybe a bit longer, reduction in capability. Whereas an uncooled sensor, whilst may not provide imagery at the level of cooled, typically will last the full 5 years with no on-site maintenance required. So it really is a trade-off between the increased capital cost and quality, but then you have to accept the ongoing sort of operational expenditure that comes along with cooled thermal. What we've been doing at Sentinel a lot recently is trying to bridge this gap between uncooled and cooled. So figuring out how we can offer cooled level performance, but without some of the drawbacks that come along with the servicing and the maintenance of cooled thermal. And we've done this through a combination of well-selected sensors and video analytics through our LR range, which allows us to near enough bridge the gap. So for opportunities or requirements that are right on the edge, where maybe cooled required, maybe not, we can use the LR range. So it's a step up above uncooled. It increased sensitivity, allows us to use longer focal length lenses and achieve these requirements without the cost implications and drawbacks that come with cooled thermal.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think the most important thing from our side at Sentinel is we've got that flexibility, and we've got the longer range, probably some of the longest range uncooled cameras in the market. But once those boundaries and we're pushing the envelope there, we can move over onto the cooled cameras.